Hello, my name is Mike. This is a bike. This is my 2000 Victory Sport Cruiser. It's a V92 SC for Sport Cruiser. This was Victory's second introduced model. They came out with the V92C, and then they took that same frame and basically the same engine, and they put shorter bars, heavier duty front suspension, dual disc brakes, its center control, and different wheels on it to give it the handling characteristics more of a sport bike. It was kind of a competitor to the Harley Sportster. I got this particular bike very, very cheap because it had, well, had engine problems. It had a broken counter shaft, so when I went into the case to replace that counter shaft, I went ahead and did that transmission upgrade. So we've been talking about the transmission upgrade. That engine on the bench is essentially the same engine as the one we have on this bike here. In the last several episodes, we went through all the transmission components. We replaced the necessary ones to upgrade it. We put a new set of gears in it as well. And we're just in the process of putting the rest of the engine back together. The cases have made it together properly, and the RTV has now completely cured. There's just a few more details to wrap up, and we'll call that engine good. So, stick around.
Somewhere in a dusty, dirty back alley in western Arizona, not far from historic Route 66, is an old fart trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. He'll work on anything, just as long as it's got at least 2 cool wheels.
I'm still waiting on rings, and until the rings arrive, I can't put the jugs or the heads back on. And because I can't put the jugs and the heads back on, I can't put the timing components together. So we're not going to deal with that side of the engine, but I can still put this side of the engine together. One of the things, okay, first we're going to put the clutch back on. That's pretty simple and straightforward. This particular engine, when I got it, did not have a primary cover, which I did have a spare of the correct vintage. This is the type that was used on the 2000 and 2001 model year. It's a little bit different. But they're all pretty much interchangeable. And in fact, when this came in, when I took the timing cover off, this is the one that's supposed to be on it, and the timing cover that was on it was this one here. So that's from a later model year. That's from a Freedom engine. That would have been 2003 or later. But they made a bunch of aftermarket ones, and they used the black one on the Sport Cruiser. And you know, there's a lot of them, but they're all interchangeable. So a lot of these parts between the original Hammer engine and the Freedom engine are interchangeable, just not all of them. The other thing I always like to do on these is, when I've got it apart, I like to do the charging system upgrade. Well, we have here the larger diameter stator and the larger diameter rotor. The only thing I'm missing is the correct trigger wheel. The later model bikes from 2002 up that used the Vistion ECU had a different trigger wheel than the early ones that the 99 through 2001 used. So I got that on order as well. So I can't complete this portion of it, but I can get the clutch on it. Hopefully in the next couple of days it will arrive. But the immediate problem that I have is, well, when I ordered this from an eBay seller, well, they shipped it to me as you see here. Now, if any of you have ever dealt with the charging systems on motorcycles, the magnets they put in these rotors are extremely strong. So my first challenge is, I got to get this thing out of this magnet. You know, I can't just tug on it by the wires. There's a lot of force there. I'm afraid I'll damage the wires. So that's my first task. And then I can go ahead and mount that stator in the cover. It bolts right here. It bolts up exactly the same as the other one. And then there's a little metal kind of a shroud or bracket that goes here to protect those cables from the spinning rotor. The other thing that I needed was this screw, which is actually a 5mm screw. And you'll notice I've ground a lot of it down. This is the screw that holds the clutch shaft in. So from this side, if this looks like a regular screw hole, that would be that hole right there. So it's threaded at that end, but the other end has to be tapered because when the shaft is installed, let me show you. Get the shaft in place here. It's not in all the way. There we go. The other end of that screw goes right into this area here. I mean, it's on the wrong side, but you get the idea. That holds our shaft in so that it can't slide out. We don't put this shaft in until after the primary cover's on because it has to engage to this component here, this little rack here, which is going to be part of our clutch. So when you operate the clutch lever, what you're doing is you're rotating a gear, and that gear is pulling on this rack here, and that's causing your clutch to be pulled against spring tension and released. So I've forced a large sheet metal screw into that hole. Won't do too much damage. Nope. Try again. Got it. Those are some killer magnets, let me tell you. Now you can see this little plate right down here will protect the wire harness as the rotor is spinning in this area here. Now we're going to put the clutch on. Let me talk a little bit about this output pulley. what you'll find is that the original configuration had a different set of sprockets and belts. Some of them were kind of a rounded notch, and then the earlier ones were a squared off notch. Now I personally haven't necessarily changed the rear pulley to match the new front pulley. I just leave the square notch one on there, works fine. I've never lost a belt, never had a problem with belts. So that's kind of your own call. You have to make that call yourself, whether you want to, run the wrong back pulley. But I've never had a problem myself. Now this pulley, when we go to put it on here, notice there's not a lot of splines showing, and that's because this output shaft is still pushed all the way back. Remember, when we assembled this, it was laying on its back, so gravity was driving that down. And when we put the cover over it, well, we slid down around it, but that's not its final position. And what you may find is even when you're in neutral, you may hear binding and clicking on this shaft. And that may actually be normal because the shaft is so far over, it's rubbing against some other gears in there. Once you put this pulley on and you tighten that nut, it's going to pull it into the correct location. You'll find that it turns just fine. So if you run into that, don't scare yourself. Don't tear it all back apart again. All right. And I should have demonstrated that before I put the clutch on so I could turn the input shaft, but I forgot to. So we're going to go ahead and put this updated pulley on. We already put the seal and this collar on. And again, these splines are a real precise fit, so they sometimes fight you a little. Get on there. Get on there. There it is. Boy, he's not cooperating. Time for my very favorite tool, the brass hammer. There she goes. Okay, and you can see it's not flush. It's not down all the way because when we tighten that nut, it's going to pull our shaft forward a little bit. Okay, when I purchased this particular one, I got lucky because it came with a lock plate and a nut as well. So that's a good thing. Got some wire here. Look at this. They got numbers and everything. This is a very efficient wrecking yard or bike salvage place. All their stuff tagged and located. I like it. All right. So we cannot use the nut that we took off. It's a different diameter. Sort of clumsy, aren't I? This one's been beat on. Have I worked on this before? It's all kinds of beat on. Well, anyway. Nonetheless, as long as the threads are good, that's my main concern. Oh yeah, threads are fine. Now, if I can just find my enormously huge socket, where did I put that bad boy? It's right here. Nope. Is this one of them? You it? Nope. Must be the other one. Yep, that's the one. Now I'm going to tell you, you saw me tighten a bunch of stuff without using a torque wrench. I don't recommend doing it that way, even though, well, do what I say, don't do what I do. Get the manual out, get the proper torque wrenches and so forth. When it comes to this one, though, I don't recall what the exact torque is, but it's like 200 foot-pounds. It's enormously large. You want it tight. You want it real tight, because there has been an issue of these working their way loose over time, and then it strips all the splines and ruins the sprocket and chucks the belt, and it's not a pretty sight. So I'm going to crank this up as high as it goes. This is a very old impact gun. The most it's going to put out is maybe 125 foot-pounds, so it's probably really not even enough for this nut. And you guys, you can correct me if I'm wrong. You can look it up and put it in the comment section so I can ignore it. Looky here what I got. It's rings. Thank goodness. They finally arrived. That didn't really take that long, but now I can, put this bad boy the rest of the way back together. Alright, now that we're ready to go ahead and put the cylinders and heads back on, something to take note of, before we put the base gasket down, we have to remove the excess RTV from this area here. We've got to make it nice and smooth. So we'll get in there with a razor blade, we'll trim this off, we'll trim alongside here where the jugs go, both here, at this point here, and then also at the back. Just remove some of this. We'll put our base gaskets on, we'll drop our jugs down. Now we always want to put the back cylinder together first. And there's a reason for that. See, if we put all the components on the front, the whole engine will be so front heavy that it will tip over. No. Sounds good. No, the reason that we do the back first is because the service manual says to do the back one first. When we go to time it, we're going to do the back one first. Well, because the back one, we got to put that chain on first before we can put this chain on. So it just makes sense. So we'll do that. We'll get our jugs and our heads on. We'll get them torqued down to the proper torque specs. And that part of it will be done. And then we'll get into the timing components. Well, now, this is embarrassing. My camera didn't want to finish the clip. It didn't download right or something. It had some issues. Anyway, so what you missed was, well, as you can see, I got the cylinders on, and I got the heads on. And I wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit about how important it is to make sure that when you put the jugs on, you get the rings, oriented right, because those gaps have to be in certain locations. I also wanted to talk about, putting a little dab of silicone where we cleaned off that silicone. That doesn't make sense, does it? But what I'm saying is you got to follow the procedure in the manual. And there's a torque sequence that you got to use when you tighten the nuts down and all that. And I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit, but, well, I guess I don't have to elaborate now. And I've talked about these same things in some of my previous videos. So when we took that engine apart that ended up going into Inferno, we talked about it. When we did the engine on the trike, we talked about it. So go back to some of my previous videos if you want a little bit more information. But the best source of information, of course, is the manual. So, anyway, so from this point forward, we're going to go ahead and put the timing components back in it. We're going to put the rotor and the trigger wheel back on it, and we're going to put the chains and all those good things all back together. And that's all that I have left here on my bench. One thing to take note of, if you look at those earlier videos, you'll see that when the heads go on and we torque the fasteners for the heads, it also holds down the cam. On the early bikes, the cams and the rockers have a separate set of fasteners. So there's one additional step on the early bikes that you don't have on the later bikes. But other than that, they're almost the same. Torque sequence is the same, all that sort of stuff. In previous episodes, I talked a little bit about the differences in the charging system between the earliest production bikes and later bikes. So the one on the right here, this is what you will find typically in your 98 through 2001 engine. And you'll notice the diameter is somewhat smaller than the one on the left. This is the upgrade we talk about from 2002 to, 2007, I think, was the last year of this configuration. And although the rotor is a different diameter, the other thing to take note of is this trigger wheel. In 2002, they went to a different ECU that received a different signal. So you'll notice it doesn't have as many bumps as the early one does. So if you're going to upgrade to this charging system, which we've done, we've put the larger diameter stator in place already, you have to transfer this trigger wheel if you're going to use it in a bike that still has the earlier ECU in place, which is typically what I end up doing. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to take this trigger wheel off, and we're going to put it on this stator. We're going to discard this along with 472 of these that I've managed to amass because, well, every bike I work on, I upgrade to this, and I have a bunch of these which I can no longer use. And then the trigger wheel is not used either, although, you kind of want to hang on to that. You never know when you might need one. Like, it's not a wearing part. It'll never wear out. I got a lot of stuff that I can't use. So we'll do that. The thing to pay attention to is the fact that when you go to put these on, these trigger wheels, well, you'll see there's a gap here. And similarly, on this one, there is a gap. So this has to be oriented in the correct location in relationship to the keyway. How do I know? Well, if you look at the keyway and the bolt directly above it, you'll see there's a line with the letter T. See if you guys can see that, okay? That is the mark that you need to line up. The T for timing with the bolt, with the keyway, and it'll be just fine. And there's a similar mark on the other type if for some reason you need to reinstall this on a rotor. So we'll do that. Then we'll install it where it belongs here. And then we'll go about putting the, valvey stuff on. we go to time this stuff, and the procedure's right there in the book. Again, I highly recommend you use the book, but it's actually pretty straightforward. When my keyway is pointing to top dead center on the back cylinder, there's actually a hole right down here, and you can put a bolt in it, and there's a hole in the crankshaft that will line up, thereby holding the crankshaft so it can't move while you're putting the chain in place. Once you get the chain in place, you're going to align it so that it's not quite aligned, but anyway, this bolt hole is going to be straight up and lined up with the middle of the rocker holder carrier thingy, and then you will see F&R means front and rear. So that will be lined up with that hole with the chain on, and your bolt holding it in the top dead center position. After you accomplish that, you rotate the crankshaft more than one turn. Not 360 degrees, but 410 degrees, which will then bring this keyway to top dead center on the front cylinder. And again, you can take this bolt out and it'll go in this hole back here, thereby holding it top dead center on the rear. And you would repeat that procedure. You would get the chain in place, and again, you would have the bolt hole straight up, and you would have the front or rear marking in the straight up bolt hole. Okay? Not that bad. Pretty simple to do. getting ready to put this cover on. Well, one of the things I believe I've mentioned before, if not, well, we'll mention it again. One of the ways that I find makes it easier to get these covers off and on, I mean, you've got to align this with an opening, you've got to align the shifter with an opening, and then you've got dowels that have to line up, and you're going to be fighting a magnet going into this rotor. So it can be kind of a difficult task. I wouldn't say difficult, challenging, shall we say. So grabbing onto this rounded, smooth, shiny cover can make it even more difficult, and it can, you know, get your little fingers caught in between and pinch your fingers. Been there, done that. So one of the ways I get around that is on this front bolt hole here, I'll actually take and tap that hole. This is a 5/16 national course. You could use an 8mm, but the idea being now I can put a bolt in there and that becomes a handle. You don't necessarily have to do it to the back side, because what you can do instead on the back is just use one of the, you know, cover bolts, and you can go into this hole here or this hole up here, whichever gives you the best advantage. And now if I put that in there and I thread this and I put a bolt there, now I've got two handles with which to grab that cover and be able to manipulate it and control it and guide it properly into place. So that's one of my little trips, whatever you want to call it. Some people think it's unnecessary, but it helps me. So you guys, you know, and if you do this, just, you know, make sure you get the shavings out of there before you put it all back together. We have completed the transmission upgrade, teardown and reassembly of this engine. Some of you might have noticed I got the wrong bolts in here. We only got two of them. These are the wrong ones too. It's because, well, I didn't have the right bolts. They're on order. They'll get here. They'll get here. And then it will be complete. So, the next question is, well, what do I put this in? Last time I checked, yep. All my motorcycles have functional engines and transmissions in them. So, the next thing I have to do is find a frame that's in dire need of an engine. You know, I probably will. Or, what if I put it in a go-kart? What if I put it in a golf cart? What if I put it on a tricycle? Put some comments down there for me, guys. Maybe I don't necessarily have to put it in another Victory motorcycle. I mean, you know, it's an engine. It'll make something move. Anyway, that concludes this. Hopefully you guys got something out of it. Hopefully you guys, if you run into a Victory motorcycle, you can pick up cheap. You can get your hands on the parts we talked about. And like I said, there's a link in my videos so that you can look at the entire procedure and see exactly what you're going to need to do that upgrade. You shouldn't be afraid of it. You know, if you can buy one of these older Victory bikes cheap and do the upgrade, got yourself a damn good bike. Anyway, thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. See you next time.